Welcome to the Money Mile Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Waller, and I'm happy you are here. We like to think of Money Mile as standing at the corner of triathlon and personal finance, and we believe that age group triathletes are the lifeblood of our sport, and we like shining the light on some good people doing great things in our sport. This summer, we are going to take the opportunity to highlight some of our favorite questions on course segments from the last several months. In this episode, we're going to bring back two of our favorite questions on course, and we're going to focus on the creation of an income plan for retirement and general retirement planning. So, let's get rolling. Please keep in mind that these are for educational purposes only and not financial advice about your individual situation. This is a great question from a newer member of our community, and I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of folks here. My husband is fortunate to retire soon. I will continue to do what I do because it is not a job to me and I really like my work. I think it is important that we can continue to live our same lifestyle in retirement, afford new bikes, equipment, etc. Are there assumptions we can make in our retirement plan to make sure this happens? Great question. This is also a very complex problem, and we are talking about likely multiple decades of your lives. We need to make sure that the decisions in your retirement are not going to leave you with a fear of running out of money later in retirement. Because of this complexity, I strongly recommend you consult with a fee-only financial planner to get perspective on your situation without being sold financial products. But sometimes people can't afford that easily. I recognize that I am biased here, but I also think that you can't afford not to get the best advice from experts in the field. It is not required that you work with someone forever, but getting some guidance, especially early on, can be tremendous. I suggest that if you are within about 5 years of your retirement, you should consider collaborating with a financial planner. Okay, now that I've got the disclaimer information out of the way, let's get to it. As a starting point, I suggest making sure that you are familiar with the common challenges you are likely to face in retirement. We have a lot of resources in the archives of this podcast about retirement planning specifically, so I would suggest reviewing some of the past episodes here. The financial training plan would also be a good place to start, and that starts at episode 21 and extends through episode 25-ish or so. Without rehashing everything, I will try to give you a couple of the key things to consider. You should understand your vision of your future and what you want your ultimate finish line to look like. For example, if you are starting with $2 million of investments, do you want to grow that in your retirement? Do you want it to stay about the same, or do you want to spend your portfolio down and, as one client had affectionately referred to it as, bounce the check to the mortician on the way out? Depending upon your approach and your vision of your future, you'll want to approach your strategies differently. You should also understand your strengths and weaknesses in relation to your financial plan. Some common strengths are good health, longevity, which can be a dual-edged sword, also the future earning capacity that you have if for some reason you did need to re-engage professionally for work. Your ability to change course down the road, it can also be a significant strength. As an example, if you are targeting $10,000 per month and your plan allows for $10,100 per month, you don't have a lot of wiggle room there, but you can always change course. If you needed to cut back, could you? Could you go from $10,000 per month to $8,000 per month? Even for a little while, just to give yourself or your portfolio some breathing room if you needed to. I don't suggest starting a 30-year mortgage at retirement as it locks in a fixed expense, likely for the rest of your life. This is where I would ideally want you to be debt-free when you start your retirement journey, but it gives you a sense of how flexible is your financial situation. Can you adjust to that moving forward? Now, your individual risk tolerance and your situation may vary here, but I think these are some good starting points for strengths. Common weaknesses. The first of which as a weakness is a potentially high tax bill in the future. You can think about it if most of your resources are in tax-deferred accounts like 401ks and 403bs that are going to be fully taxable in retirement, you want to make sure that you have appropriately assessed or appropriately adjusted your targets for that tax bill in retirement. Along with this, can you access the money that you have without penalty? Now, if you've not reached a qualifying age, which is commonly age 59 and a half in the US, Can you access enough of your resources without that penalty? The penalties can be steep if you're trying to get to your money early, and there are other ways around it if you are not 59 and a half, or you might have special accounts that allow you to get to it sooner, but it's something you want to be aware of. Second common weakness is a risk of long-term care. One half of retirees will need some healthcare resources of some sort within their lifetime. This means you need to have a long-term care strategy, not necessarily long-term care insurance. In my world, a paid-off home can be a great resource as a fallback strategy. If you did need long-term care or something of that nature, having significant home equity can be a potential significant resource to fall back on, and essentially consider yourself self-insured if you have enough home equity. If you are married, something I have recently started talking with clients about is considering the strength of their marital relationship. This has been a growing trend in recent years of more divorces of couples over 50. This is commonly referred to as a gray divorce or a silver divorce. If half of marriages end in divorce, that means that the other half end in death, which is a fun little aspect of statistics. But if half of marriages end in divorce, in my world, that means that investing in your relationship is important, and it can be a big piece to making sure that you're on the same page growing together into the future and not growing apart. This is especially important as the two of you have likely always had other things going on in your lives, work, raising children, whatever it might be. When the two of you are bopping around the house all day, staring at each other, it can get a bit awkward. So let's make sure you are retiring to a marriage you want to enjoy together. Taxes are one of the largest expenses over time, but a divorce and retirement could be devastating on multiple levels, not the least of which would be your financial situation. The next weakness is your fixed income ratio and inflation risk. What I mean by this is that if a lot of your financial resources are made up by a high fixed income, so pensions and Social Security, which is great, this could also have an unintended drawback. Most fixed income sources will not keep up with inflation over a multi-decade retirement. You need to have enough other resources to bridge the gap, and they need to be positioned appropriately. Now, it could be an investment portfolio, rental properties, or whatever, but it will likely be difficult for people to remain successfully retired with only fixed income sources. Along with this, it is possible that you might have too much of your resources in cash, so it's something to evaluate. It is common to see that as people get closer to retirement, they put all of their money or a significant portion of their money in conservative investments for stability. And if you knew you were only going to live 4 or 5 years, that's probably not a bad idea. But for most of the folks listening to this, that is probably unrealistic, and your excess cash or conservative investments are not going to keep up with inflation over time. The next potential weakness is, does your portfolio management strategy contain a transition plan? If you are going to rely on your portfolio for distributions within the next 5 years, you need to approach this correctly. Drawing down a portfolio incorrectly, especially in the first 5 years of retirement, can be devastating if it's not done correctly. These are some of the common risks that I would want you to be aware of. Other assumptions to be aware of or think of to make sure that everything's taken care of are a couple of general financial hygiene things, like make sure that your estate plan is squared away. What happens if you can't make a decision on your own behalf, if you got sick or injured, or what happens if you pass away? The next is to make sure that you review your risk management strategies so you're not wasting a lot of money on insurances that you don't need. If we step beyond some of the tactical pieces there, you should also give some consideration to the typical phases of retirement spending. Now, this isn't the same case for everyone, but it's common that early retirement we consider to be the go-go years where you're able to enjoy travel and do all the things you want to do. Over a period of time, most people will reach a point where they have slow-go years, where maybe it's a little bit more difficult for them to get around, but they still do that. They can't necessarily cram themselves into the back of the plane anymore, so if they're going to go travel, they're going to need to be buying first-class tickets and giving themselves a little bit more leeway because it takes them a little bit longer to get around, that sort of thing. So we call it slow-go years. And then at some point, all of us will reach a point where we have no-go years. You want to understand the differences of those phases, and you might want to understand that you could spend a little bit more early in your retirement while spending a little bit less later on. But in those later years, it's often the case that your medical expenses are higher. So typically, we don't necessarily see a significant decrease in expenses later on. It's that your expenses shift. So where you used to be traveling all over the place and having lots of fun, later on in your life, you might be spending a lot more on medical things. Another aspect of this to consider in your assumptions are your incomes aligned with the phases of your life? You might still have a mortgage in the early phase, typically those go-go years that I just mentioned. And if you still have a mortgage at that phase, you need to understand how those different pieces will interact. What is your Social Security strategy? There is a right time to take it, but unfortunately, you won't know for a couple of decades until after you've started. What is the best strategy for you, given where you are now? Please keep in mind that you can continue to reevaluate this as you go. It typically doesn't make much sense for you to delay Social Security beyond age 70, but you don't have to make a contractual obligation at 67 that you're going to wait until 70. You can continue to evaluate that and keep your options open. The next aspect that I thought of was, are you and your spouse really financially ready for retirement? Sometimes an employer will tell you that you can take a pension at a certain age or years of service, but it is not a testament to your financial ability to live your life well in retirement. Just because you have reached an age does not mean you have enough resources to live the life you want to live. Especially in a situation like this, where I'm sure the person asking the question really wants to be as comfortable as possible throughout their retirement, you need to make sure your financial situation is ready. This reminds me that I've told many people in my life that I thought they could do an iron distance triathlon. The implied comment here is that they could do it if they did the right training. I think that many people can do that if it's important for them. Just because someone tells you that you can does not mean that you can sign up for an Ironman tomorrow. You need to make sure that you've done the work and the training so that you can have a good experience on race day. Just because an employer tells you that you can stop working at that employer and take a pension is not a guarantee that you will be able to live the life that you are proud of. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you here, but I hope that helps clarify some of the assumptions that you should be considering when you're thinking about your retirement plan, and in particular, if your husband is retiring early. How do I create an income plan for my retirement? A bit of context here. The person who had sent this in is married, somewhat newly retired, with plenty of cash flow now due to fixed incomes, feels comfortable at current, but is concerned about the future. Inflation is one of his biggest concerns. A mentor of mine is fond of saying that cash flow is the heartbeat of your retirement. And this analogy has stuck with me, and I thought it was appropriate given the content and our interview later. When Dr. Farrow joins us, we will discuss that one measure of heart health is predicated on variability. And from Dr. Farrow's perspective, heart rate variability is a fundamental measure of how healthy one's heart truly is. When it comes to cash flow as the heartbeat of retirement, your cash flow much prefers stability. This is challenged often when working with clients who have a volatile income stream, or whether it's bonuses or commissions paid periodically through the year, or whatever those business operations that are funded by grants or what have you that have a high degree of seasonality to them. All of these situations create volatility in cash flow. As we think about creating an income plan for the future and for retirement, stability is the key. I am going to make a series of suggestions here, and I suggest you try some things on and see what works for you. The best income plan is the one you will stick with, so here goes. Let's put some numbers to this for the sake of our example. Let's say that you are currently spending $10,000 per month and your income comes from a variety of sources. The first suggestion is to be open to setting up a structure that supports you reaching your goals versus just the system that has gotten you to where you're at now. This may take a bit more intentionality and a bit of additional work, but anything worth having is worth a little bit of work, right? Depending upon your situation, this could be as few as 2 different accounts, but is likely at least 5 accounts, and I'll share with you a little bit more about why. Consider setting up as many accounts as you need and working towards as few as you can functionally get away with. This is where the experimentation comes in, and we have to be willing to try something new. We have two different large-scale infrastructure pieces that we need to have present as we're working through this. The first is your banking relationships. The second is your investing infrastructure. Generally, I prefer a local community bank versus large conglomerate banks, but there are pros and cons to each. Related to investing accounts, I also recommend consolidating your accounts into one large-scale brokerage platform. I recommend you do this when you can, as this will allow for better visibility into assets you hold. So seeing all of your stuff in one place makes it much easier to manage. You can also work with a financial planner to help you set up an infrastructure so you can see all of your stuff in one place. Let's tackle the banking side of things first. Have all of your income deposited into an account that you do not spend money out of. This is commonly a savings account. Make a monthly transfer of the amount you want to spend into your spending account. This is often a checking account. If you have periodic expenses like property taxes or insurance payments, you can also set aside those expenses in a different account if you like, but fund the account monthly as well. Again, it's a focus on stability. If you have experienced cash flow challenges in the past, I have a couple of additional suggestions. The first of which is that you should use debit cards versus credit cards. Credit cards allow you to spend however much you would like and force you to pay the bill later. In this situation, this would be like deferring all of those heartbeats until the end of the month when that credit card payment is due and forcing you to do all of those beats at once. Additionally, consider setting up separate spending accounts for different types of expenses. For example, household, medical, entertainment, travel, and kids if you have them. That's 5 primary categories. This could look like monthly transfers from savings to checking, like $5,000 to the household account, $500 to medical, $1,500 to entertainment, $1,500 to travel, and so on. This allows you to use a modern-day equivalent of the envelope system that has been used successfully for years, but you still get to use debit cards. My hope is that your spending expenses leave plenty of room for long-term savings where appropriate if you're still accumulating funds. But again, a lot of the model here is around the income plan for retirement. This can also be a little bit challenging if you have multiple people responsible for spending out of the same account. For example, you and your partner both buy groceries and household goods at different times of the month. With banking apps and technology these days, along with those debit cards, you can do a pretty decent job of preventing missteps. But this does require some conversations between you and your partner about how you are spending money. Many of my clients have also found success with earmarking a lump sum every year for larger elective expenses that might be variable throughout the year. For example, triathlon expenses. If you want to spend $5,000 that year on your hobby, you have a discrete amount of money to do that. And once the money is gone, you can see that it's gone. If you want to spend $2,000 on race entry fees earlier in the year and you want to buy a new wetsuit and race wheels, you will have better visibility on how much you can spend on coaching or gym fees or whatever else it might be. Some people also prefer this account gets funded once a year, but others fund it quarterly or monthly. Maybe it's based on a bonus or what have you. Generally speaking, the less often you touch it, the better off you are going to be. Other clients have found success with their personal expenses getting funded monthly, and they can effectively save up for larger expenses they want to make in future years, like buying a bike or something of that nature. A great example of this is the mechanics behind a travel account and how that's normally funded. If you really want to visit Iceland or Spain in 3 years and think it's going to cost you approximately $15,000 to do it, you can get a sense of how the weekend trip to the local winery will make it take a little bit longer for you to reach that larger goal. Now, on to the investing side of things. If you are retiring this year, there are likely going to be 2 large challenges you will face: inflation and taxes. A retired couple today is likely looking ahead at 3 decades worth of retired life. With that assumption and standard inflation, your expenses are going to go up by approximately 2.5 times within your retirement. At the end, your $10,000 monthly expense that we were talking about will go up to $25,000 per month by the end of your retirement. The reality is that your fixed income streams have historically not kept up with that inflation rate and grow at about 1/2 of the real rate of inflation. If your income consists of a pension and 2 Social Securities that add up to $10,000 net deposited into your account in today's dollars, you likely won't feel the inflationary gap for a couple of years, but it will creep up on you through what I call lifestyle deflation. You used to go out to dinner twice a week and now you only go out once because that's all you can afford. The best way I have found to address this inflation gap over time is to revisit the cash flows regularly. I typically like to check in on cash flows at least twice a year. But for the sake of our example, let's say that you wanted to spend $10,000, but your fixed incomes only provided $8,000. This leaves us with a gap of $2,000 per month. With an appropriately managed investment strategy, you should be able to withdraw at least 4% from your portfolio. So in order to make this work, you have to have at least $600,000 net in your portfolio should you want to make that math work. Just walking you through the quick math there, $2,000 a month is $24,000 a year. Divided by 4% is $600,000. Another way to get to that is a shortcut. You can also take your monthly spend or what you're going to need from your portfolio and multiply it by 300. You get to the same result. $2,000 a month, $6,000 is how much you need to have in your portfolio. There are different ways you can improve on this and improve on the 4% rule, but for the sake of the conversation today, let's play it safe and stick with that 4% rule. The challenge is that putting $600,000 into a portfolio and hoping for the best is a strategy that will likely come back to haunt you at some point. Markets go up and markets go down. If you don't manage the investments appropriately and maintain the flexibility to decrease your expenses when the markets go down, you could find yourself in an uncomfortable situation. Generally speaking, 4 out of 5 years, the market is either flat or up. Therefore, 1 out of 5 years, the market is down. The risk you run is that if you are not managing your investments correctly, that 1 year will sink your portfolio and it will not be able to recover. We need the equity market growth to outpace inflation. We also need the stability for the 1 out of 5 years when the markets go down. A colleague of mine is known for saying that there are generally 2 times the markets will go down. The first is when you retire, and the second is when you need money. All jesting aside, I generally suggest that you start with a 2-year cash buffer. In this example, if you need $2,000 per month, $24,000 per year, your portfolio cash should be approximately $48,000. Then you need to have enough protected from market volatility that if that one down year was bad enough that it takes several years for the market to recover, which happens, that you will be able to let the portfolio recover and you are not going to wreck the overall integrity of the portfolio. I like to see 3 years of expenses and an income-focused portfolio that will do a better job of keeping up with inflation than cash will, but will not be nearly as volatile as the equity or growth portion of the portfolio either. The rest of your portfolio can be invested in growth investments, and when the markets go down, when that does happen, your portfolio will have a built-in buffer or shock absorber. I also look at this as a retirement transition plan. So if you think of transitions like in an Ironman, if you go into T2 in an Ironman, Mach 1 with no idea of where your stuff is and how you're going to get through transition, the transition is going to be awkward. You might be going as fast as you can, but without practice and without a plan, you get rushed, maybe you drop your fuel, or forget to grab your hat, who knows? But you need to have a transition plan in triathlon. For retirement, the retirement transition plan is no different. I suggest 2 years of cash, 3 years of income, and let the rest of your portfolio grow. For the sake of this example, you would have roughly $48,000 in cash, $72,000 in an income-focused portfolio, and $480,000 in a growth portfolio, focused primarily on equity investments as best it can. If your growth allocation is all stock, this is overall about an 80% equity or stock allocation. The way that this gets implemented in your world is that you set up a monthly distribution from your cash account in your portfolio to your savings account. You set up a monthly distribution from that savings account to your checking account at the bank. You set that up for the amount of money you plan on spending that month. And you can break it up into multiple accounts like the household and entertainment accounts like I mentioned before. And that is how I recommend you set up an income plan with your banking infrastructure and your investing infrastructure. I hope this episode of Money Mile was valuable for you. If it was, please share the podcast with your training buddies and friends. Keep in mind that if you work out, everything else will too, and we look forward to talking with you next time on Money Mile.